rain hadn't let up for miles. It painted the windshield in blurred streaks as Ethan Brooks gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the leather. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in Jackson, not in the shadow of the mountains, that still echoed with memories he'd spent years trying to silence. This trip was supposed to be nothing more than paperwork. A land dispute, some signatures, a handshake with a local attorney, and then gone. Back to his life in Denver, back to normalcy, back to forgetting. But Jackson, Wyoming didn't forget. It pressed against him the moment he crossed into the valley, wrapping him in pine and storm and ghosts. He should have known. He didn't take the scenic route for nostalgia. He took it because the main highway was closed for construction. Fate, it seemed, had opinions. Route 89 curved along the edge of the forest like a scar, familiar in the way old wounds are. Ethan's eyes scanned the road, his focus steady despite the storm. He didn't want to remember, he didn't want to feel, and then he saw it. A shape on the side of the road. Small, still. He squinted through the downpour, easing his foot onto the brake. The figure lay just off the asphalt, limp, soaked through, unmoving. As he drew closer, the headlights caught the unmistakable outline. A German shepherd, its ribs protruding beneath matted fur, its body barely more than a breath. Ethan pulled over hard. He was out of the truck before he could think, the rain pelting his shoulders, pooling at his feet. He approached slowly, cautiously. This was Wyoming, after all, where even strays could snap. But the dog didn't flinch, didn't growl, just turned its head and looked at him. Ethan froze. There was something in that gaze. Not panic, not pain. Something deeper, older, recognition. His heart stuttered, caught in his throat like it had forgotten how to beat. His lips moved before his mind could stop them. Scout. The word hung in the air, delicate and dangerous. And then, a tail moved, just slightly. A soft, trembling wag. The dog made a sound, a whimper, barely audible over the rain. But it was enough to crack the ears wide open. Scout, it couldn't be. But it was. Ethan dropped to his knees, ignoring the cold, the wet, the way the world seemed to tilt. He reached out slowly, and the dog, Scout, leaned into his touch. Not out of instinct, out of memory. 15 years of believing this dog was gone. Buried, lost, forgotten. And yet here he was, broken but breathing, waiting like no time had passed at all. Ethan swallowed hard. He wrapped his jacket around the trembling animal, scooping him into his arms with a care he hadn't shown anything in years. Scout's head rested against his chest like it belonged there. And in that moment, the road ahead didn't look like an escape anymore. It looked like a reckoning. The lodge was quiet when Ethan pulled into the gravel lot, the rain still stitching the air in cold silver threads. It wasn't a place he planned to stay, just a roadside stop, tucked against a riverbank like it had been forgotten by time. But nothing about this night was part of any plan anymore. Scout lay curled in the passenger seat, Ethan's jacket still draped over him, his breathing shallow but steady. Each pothole made him flinch. Each flash of lightning pulled his gaze somewhere, far away to places Ethan couldn't follow. He wasn't just hurt. He was hollowed. Inside the front office, Ethan handed over a credit card and asked no questions. Room 4, ground floor, close to the truck. Easy to carry. He wasn't about to leave Scout out of sight, not now, not ever again. The room smelled like old wood and heating oil, with a hint of maple syrup that clung to the curtains like a faded memory. Ethan spread a folded blanket by the baseboard heater and gently laid Scout down, watching the steam rise from his fur as it slowly warmed. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was thick, not empty but intentional, a kind of understanding that didn't need words. Ethan knelt beside him with a towel, carefully drying the soaked coat. His hands moved with the memory of old routines. Wipe the paws, check the pads, look for ticks. But now each movement carried new weight. Each touch was filled with questions he didn't dare ask aloud. Scout didn't resist. He didn't tremble. He just watched. His eyes were wide and unblinking. Not afraid. Not wary. Just searching. Like he couldn't believe Ethan was real. Ethan whispered to him, voice cracking under the weight of it all. "I don't know what this is, but if you're who I think you are." Scout blinked slowly. Then, as if to answer, he shifted, just slightly, and rested one paw gently against Ethan's boot. It was nothing, and it was everything. A gesture, a message, a choice, and Ethan broke. He didn't cry, not yet. But something inside him folded under the pressure. He reached forward, placing his hand over Scout's paw, grounding himself in the contact. He didn't know how this was possible, or why fate had chosen this moment. But none of that mattered. Scout was here, and he remembered. The night stretched on, the storm outside growing quieter. Ethan offered food and water. Scout ignored both. He lay still, ribs sharp under skin, eyes tracking every move Ethan made. There was no begging in his posture, no pleading, only patience, the kind that comes from years of disappointment. That crushed Ethan more than any injury ever could. He slumped into the room's only chair and stared across the space between them. Not far, just a few feet. But it felt like a chasm built from lost time and unspoken pain. "I thought you were gone," he murmured. Scout didn't move. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on knees, heart pounding. "They told me you were gone." Still, no sound. Just those eyes, and in them, history. Ethan tried to remember the last time he'd said the name out loud. Scout. It had been after the accident. After the funeral. After everything crumbled and the house fell into silence. They'd told him Scout had run off, disappeared, maybe hit by a car, maybe lost to the mountains. No one had looked too hard. No one had wanted to. He believed them. What choice did he have? But now, looking at the dog before him, he realized what he'd truly lost wasn't just a pet. It was a piece of his own story. A chapter that had been torn out, burned and buried. Scout hadn't forgotten. He'd waited, starved, suffered, and somehow survived. At some point, Ethan must have dozed off in the chair. When he opened his eyes again, dawn was seeping into the room like a secret finally ready to be told. Scout stirred near the heater, stretching slowly, groaning softly. Ethan moved closer, crouching beside him again. For the first time, Scout took a cautious sip of water. Then another. It wasn't much, but it was enough to say, "I trust you." And then Ethan saw it, beneath the dirt and grime on the collar, faint but still legible. One word. Buckley. Ethan's breath caught. Buckley wasn't a name. It was a place. Nearly 50 miles away. A direction he hadn't thought about in years. "Why would someone take you there?" he whispered. "Why would they rename you?" Scout didn't answer. Of course he didn't. But something in Ethan's gut began to twist. The kind of twist that feels like smoke curling under a locked door. This wasn't just a lost dog. This was a trail. Someone had taken him. Someone had buried the truth, and Scout had carried it all this way. Now Ethan knew, this bond between them, it wasn't just about reunion. It was a question, and it demanded an answer. Tracing the past morning had peeled back the storm, but the questions remained. They clung to Ethan like fog on his windshield as he loaded Scout into the truck once more. The dog moved slowly but with purpose, as if he understood the importance of what came next. Buckley. The name etched on that collar was no coincidence. It was a breadcrumb, a starting point, and Ethan had followed stranger threads before, but never one that pulled this hard. The town sat nearly 50 miles southeast, a small blip on the map surrounded by pine and farmland, the kind of place where people still left keys in their ignitions and waved at passing cars. It didn't feel like the kind of place a dog would just end up, especially not a dog like Scout. Their first stop was the Buckley Veterinary Clinic, a white brick building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that looked older than the receptionist behind the desk. Ethan stepped inside, his presence bringing in the cool mountain air and the faint scent of wet dog. Dr. Caroline Foster greeted him with a skeptical glance, her arms crossed over her scrub top. She wasn't unkind, just cautious, the kind of person who'd seen more heartbreak walk through that door than joy. "I'm not looking for a vet," Ethan said. "I'm looking for answers." That earned him a tilt of the head. He explained, briefly, carefully, the story, the reunion, the name, the years. Dr. Foster didn't interrupt. When he was finished, she stepped around the counter and crouched beside Scout, her fingers brushing gently against his ears. "You know," she murmured, not to Ethan but to the dog, "you've seen things most of us couldn't survive." Scout held her gaze without flinching. She led them into the back exam room and began the checkup. Her hands were practiced, kind, deliberate. She muttered updates as she worked. Hips weak, weight low, likely 15 years old. Unusual for a shepherd to make it this far, especially in this shape, she said. But his heart's hanging in there, barely. Ethan watched Scout watch her. Calm. Still, almost like he knew what was coming before she even moved. "He's got something to live for," she added, looking up at Ethan. He nodded. "I think he's had it all along." After the exam, Ethan asked the question that had been burning a hole in his thoughts. "Have you ever had anyone bring in a dog like him? From Buckley? Or use that name on a file, maybe as an owner?" Dr. Foster pulled up her records, tapping through years of digital logs and dusty PDFs. Her face didn't change much, but eventually she sat back in her chair and shook her head. "No matches," she said. "If he came through here?" "He didn't. Leave a footprint." Ethan thanked her, left his number, and stepped back into the cool afternoon. His boots crunched against gravel, his thoughts spinning like a gear with too many teeth missing. Scout followed close behind, walking with a limp but no hesitation. They made their way back through town, past storefronts and porches. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks and weather-worn fences. That's when it began. First, a mechanic outside a garage looked up, his wrench slipping from his hand. "Well, I'll be..." Ethan turned, but the man was already staring. Not at him, but at Scout. Next, a woman folding laundry on her porch paused mid-motion, a shirt draped over her arm. She leaned forward slightly, squinting through the sunlight. "Looks just like that dog," she muttered. "The Brooks dog from way back." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't stop walking, but every word hit like a stone in his stomach. Back at the lodge, he opened his laptop. The Wi-Fi was slow, the interface clunky, but he was determined. He scoured public records, shelter logs, adoption databases. He cross-referenced the counties around Buckley, looking for anything. Any German shepherd listed in the past decade. Nothing, until he dug deeper. An archived PDF, nearly invisible on a forgotten website. A scan of a handwritten shelter intake sheet. The ink smudged, the formatting crooked. Intake, number 491 German Shepherd. Adult male, untagged. Temperament, aggressive. Recommendation, transfer or euthanasia. There was no picture, but in the margin, almost. As an afterthought, a single word scribbled in block letters. Transferred. Transferred where? That night, the wheels turned toward a place Ethan had buried long ago. The one location he hadn't dared return to. The old Brooks family home. It sat just outside of Jackson, half swallowed by pine and thyme. The driveway was overgrown. The windows, dark and boarded. But the bones of the house still stood, stubborn and sad. Ethan pulled in slowly, headlights catching familiar corners. He opened the door. Scout didn't wait. He climbed down from the truck, slower than before, and walked, purposefully, to the front steps. He didn't sniff, didn't circle. He just stopped and whimpered. Once, Ethan's heart cracked. A sound like that didn't come from the throat. It came from memory. A retired mailman shuffled past, groceries in hand. He paused, squinting through the dusk. "Well, I'll be..." The man said again, this time directly to Ethan. "Didn't think I'd see that dog again." Ethan turned. "What do you mean?" "That your folks' place?" the man asked, nodding toward the house. "That dog came back here every day after the crash. Sat on that porch and cried day after day, then one day he was gone. Gone. But Scout hadn't given up. He had been taken, and Ethan knew. This wasn't just a sad story anymore. It was something else, something that smelled a lot like a secret. The keys shook in Ethan's hand, not from cold, but from the tremble that comes when you're about to open a door you've spent years pretending didn't exist. The storage unit was unremarkable. Steel walls, a rolling metal door that groaned when he lifted it. But to Ethan, it might as well have been a tomb. Dust, rust, and silence greeted him inside. Old furniture leaned against the walls like forgotten sentries. Boxes warped by time. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that tastes like old grief. Scout stayed by the truck, watching, as if he understood what this place was, as if he'd been here before. Ethan moved through the clutter slowly, as though disturbing anything would unravel what little he had left holding him together. He found it in the corner, a dented green cabinet with a broken lock. The same one that used to sit in his father's garage, next to a red toolbox and a cracked bucket filled with Scout's old tennis balls. His breath caught as he knelt. He opened the cabinet and began to dig, paper after paper, receipts long faded, photos curled at the edges, and then, tucked behind a bent license plate and an envelope yellowed with time, his name, scrawled in sharp, uneven handwriting. Ethan. He knew that script. It wasn't his father's. It wasn't his mother's. It was Martin's. The envelope felt heavier than it should. It crackled as he broke the seal. Inside, 2 pages, no greeting, no apology, just lines of mechanical sentences like someone confessing through clenched teeth. After the crash, Scout became unmanageable. Wouldn't let anyone near the house. We made the decision to transfer him to a behavioral facility near Buckley that handled trauma cases. He was listed under intake number 491. We hoped someone would adopt him. I didn't want you to know. You were dealing with enough. Ethan stared at the page. The words blurred. He blinked hard, but they didn't change. This wasn't fate. This wasn't a tragedy no one could stop. This was a choice. They had chosen to get rid of Scout, to erase him like an inconvenient memory. Not because they had to, but because it was easier than facing the pain. The last line cut through him like ice. I never checked to see if he made it. He stumbled backward, the letter clutched in his hand, like it could somehow steady him. Scout was still watching, still waiting. Back at the lodge, Ethan didn't speak. He sat on the floor beside Scout, letter in hand, the words echoing in his mind. Scout nudged his leg, placed a paw on his knee. No judgment, just presence, as if to say, I'm still here. Ethan choked on the words. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear, Scout, I didn't know. The dog didn't need to respond. He stayed. That night, something shifted. This wasn't just about a dog who had disappeared. This was about someone who had been thrown away and chose to survive. Anyway, Scout had waded through hunger, cold, abandonment. And still he had believed that Ethan would come, that someone would come, and that faith had outlived every betrayal. The next morning, Ethan woke early. He sat by the window long after the sun cracked open the sky. Scout lay beside the heater, breathing deep but slow. His body older, his fur grayer, but his eyes never dimmed. Ethan whispered, I'm going to find out everything. No more running. By noon, they were on the road, back toward Buckley, toward the past. The drive wasn't scenic, just long stretches of road broken by fences and pine. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting close to Scout. The dog didn't sleep. He watched, calm, ready. At the Buckley Municipal Records office, the clerk didn't even glance up when Ethan walked in. I need access to animal intake archives, he said. That's not public, she replied, eyes still on her screen. Ethan placed the envelope on the counter, folded just enough to show the line that mattered. Intake number 491. Transferred. Her fingers paused. Her eyes narrowed. Wait here. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thin file folder that smelled of damp basements and forgotten guilt. Inside, a single sheet. Intake number 491. Male, German Shepherd. Temperament, guarded. Status, euthanasia recommended. Ethan's throat tightened. But then a margin note. Transfer denied, and beneath that, in messy ink, Keene. Ethan blinked. Daniel Keene. He turned the page. A release form. A scribbled signature. A handwritten note. Dog refused food. Would not interact. Taken home for extended care. No address listed. Teton Village. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Back in the truck, Ethan turned to Scout. We're getting close. The dog rested his chin on the dashboard, staring out at the road like he'd known this was coming all along. Daniel Keene. A name. A shelter file. And now, a hope Ethan didn't dare put into words. Someone had saved Scout. Someone had seen something, worth saving even when everyone else signed off on letting him fade. And Ethan knew this was no longer about grief. This was about redemption. The road to Teton Village curled through hills like it was hiding something sacred. Pines lined both sides, dusted in fresh snow, the kind that muffles sound and slows time. Ethan didn't speak much. Neither did Scout. But their silence wasn't empty. It was charged, like a tide coming in. The address came from a property tax search. One cabin, registered to a Daniel Keene. No phone number, no forwarding address. Just a name that refused to disappear. When the cabin came into view, it felt less like a house and more like a memory. Weathered wood, frosted windows, shrubs grown wild, a porch with a single rocking chair. Ethan parked. Scout didn't wait for permission. He stepped out of the truck, moving slow but steady. Every footfall was intentional. Ethan followed. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. Daniel Keene stood there, tall but stooped, with a beard like wild snow and eyes that saw everything all at once. He didn't ask questions. He didn't seem surprised. You brought him home, he said softly. Ethan nodded. They went inside. The warmth of the place felt lived in. Firewood stacked neatly, coffee steaming on the table, boots drying near the hearth. Scout sniffed the air, then walked forward. Not cautiously, but reverently. Daniel knelt, knees cracking, and met Scout's eyes. The old dog stepped close. No bark, no growl, just a quiet leaning in. A shared knowing. I thought he was gone, Daniel whispered. After he ran off, I figured he'd given up. Ethan stared. He wasn't yours, was he? No. Daniel said he never was. He was always waiting for someone else. They sat at the table. Daniel poured lukewarm coffee into mismatched mugs and began to speak. Scout had been marked for euthanasia. Too guarded, too damaged. Most shelters gave up after a few days. But Daniel didn't see a dangerous dog. He saw something waiting. He didn't growl, he said. Didn't bark, just sat there, watching the door like it was supposed to open. So Daniel opened it. He took the dog home. Didn't name him, didn't train him, just let him be. But the dog never stayed. He'd slip. Out at night. Wander for miles, always east, always toward Jackson. Daniel would find him standing at the edge of highways, waiting. Then one day Daniel found something hidden in the dog's fur. A photo, wrapped in plastic, creased and faded, but intact. He stood and opened a drawer, pulling it out with the kind of care you'd give a relic. He handed it to Ethan. It was him. Barely 20. Standing in front of the old house, one hand resting on Scout's back, not a posed photo, just a captured moment. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. He never let me throw it away, Daniel said. Kept hiding it under his bedding, like he knew it mattered. They sat in silence. Scout had curled near the fire, eyes half closed, but not from exhaustion, from peace. He had made it home. Ethan leaned back, the photo still in his hand. I thought I imagined the connection, he said. Thought maybe I made it bigger than it was. Daniel looked at him. You didn't. He never forgot. Later that evening, Ethan and Scout made their way back to Jackson, but Ethan didn't. Go to the lodge, he went to an office, Martin's. The man looked up, startled to see him. Even more startled to see Scout. Ethan didn't waste time. He placed the photo on the desk. I need you to tell me the truth, he said. All of it. Martin stared at the picture like it was a ghost. Where did you get this? From the man who saved him, Ethan said. After you threw him away. Martin slumped back in his chair. I didn't throw him away, I was trying to protect you. From what? Martin hesitated. Then rose, walked to a locked drawer, pulled out a small box. Inside, a flash drive. There were signs, he said. Things I didn't want to see, he explained. Scout had scratched endlessly at his father's office door, whined every night. Always the same spot. Martin thought he was grieving, until one day he opened the door and saw the claw marks by the desk. After the crash, he found the security footage. He couldn't face it, so he buried it and sent Scout away. Back at the lodge, Ethan opened his laptop, inserted the drive. The footage flickered to life, grainy, time-stamped. His father's office, a shadow moved. Not his father. Not his mother, someone else. A man, placing something beneath the desk, then slipping out the back door. Hours later, the crash. Ethan froze. He knew that man. A family friend. A partner in the business. Someone who had grieved with them. Scout had seen him. Tried to warn them. Tried to tell the truth, and for that he was silenced. The dog stirred beside Ethan, resting his head on his knee. No bark, no sound. Just that same unshakable presence. He had never stopped trying to speak the truth. And now, someone was finally listening. Ethan didn't feel lost anymore. He felt furious, focused, ready. The silence he and Scout had carried was finally breaking. And what came next would change everything. Morning light spilled over the Teton Range like a whispered promise. It bathed the lodge in gold, touching every frost-kissed rooftop, every pine branch, every inch of ground that had borne witness to years of silence. Ethan stood on the porch with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. His other hand rested gently on Scout's back. The dog sat beside him, steady and quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if searching for the next path. The road behind them had been long, twisted, scarring, but they had made it. The video footage from the flash drive was handed over to the sheriff that morning. No fanfare, no courtroom theatrics. Ethan didn't want revenge. He wanted closure. The sheriff, a man whose lined face spoke of decades balancing duty and doubt, watched the footage with a clenched jaw. When it ended, he looked at Ethan and said simply, "We've waited long enough." An official investigation was opened within the hour. Ethan didn't stick around to watch the legal machine turn. He didn't need to. The truth was no longer buried. The silence had been broken, not by a scream, but by a paw laid gently on a knee, by patience, loyalty, memory. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove back to the old family house. It hadn't changed, still leaning into the wind like it was tired of standing, but something felt different now. Not haunted, not heavy, honest. He opened the truck door and let Scout out. The old dog didn't hesitate. He walked slowly, steadily to the front porch, his front porch, and sat. Just like he had, day after day, after the accident. Waiting for someone who never came, but this time he wasn't waiting. He was home. Ethan joined him, sitting shoulder to shoulder, the wood beneath them groaning with time. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photo, the one Daniel had saved all those years. He laid it gently on the step between them. "You brought me back," he said quietly. "You remembered what I forgot, and you held on to it. For both of us." Scout leaned into him, not with need but with warmth, with presence, no dramatics, no grand gesture, just forgiveness. In that moment, Ethan didn't feel like he owed Scout an apology anymore. He felt like he owed him a life. They moved a few weeks later into a modest house just outside of town, nestled near the woods where the wind was soft and the stars came out early. Scout had a porch to nap on, trails to explore, and a man who didn't need to be reminded twice how much loyalty was worth. The days were simple: walks at dawn, warm food, long naps in sunlit corners. Neighbors called them inseparable. Ethan didn't. Correct them. He didn't need to. This wasn't about training or ownership. It was about a bond born in fire, tested in silence, and reforged in truth. Scout grew older, slower. His steps faltered. His naps stretched longer, but his eyes never lost their light. And one morning, with frost dusting the grass and birds singing like they knew something sacred, Scout laid his head in Ethan's lap and didn't get back up. There was no sound, no struggle, only peace. Ethan sat there long after, hand resting gently on Scout's fur. He didn't cry, not in the way people expect. He simply whispered, "Thank you." The world, in its strange, sacred way, stood still, because sometimes the ones we forget don't return to be remembered. They return to remind us of who we really are, but Ethan's journey isn't over. In the next chapter, we'll follow the trail of what Scout saw that night, and the man who tried to bury it. What else was hidden behind silence? Who else knew? And what does justice look like when the only witness couldn't speak? Stay tuned. Part 2 is coming soon.